Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar titled 7 Contemplative Discipline Steps to Address Challenging Behaviors. This is the webinar 1 of the 2-part webinar series. Again, welcome, everyone. And this slide shows the books that I have written and also the quick reference guides as well as the music CD for using with children with autism. And I'm an author and an educational consultant, and these books provide me the opportunity to reflect and come up with these ideas for these webinars. And this particular quick reference guide is the major resource for this webinar and the next one. And apparently, according to the publisher, I was at a conference this last week, and I was presenting, it was a Behavior Institute. When I was presenting, the publisher who is marketing the product said that this is selling extraordinarily well, unbelievable, he said. It uses the same, the webinar today is taken from this concept that was presented in this quick reference guide. It's sold by Education 311. So what are we going to be looking at in this and the next webinar? How do we have a kind of a step-by-step system in order to apply a discipline approach that is reflective and contemplative? And how do we make sure we use data collection, we use the ABC model, which is basic, and most of you, almost everybody who is joining the webinar would know about it because it's basic. But how do we use a reflective approach and not a reactive approach in addressing discipline issues? And I will make sure, as I always try to do, to blend in some case examples, some student situations, so that we can apply the principles that I have shared with you at the beginning in working out, in addressing the behavior issues. And how do we make sure that the classroom climate is very positive and it is productive, and making sure that it is enabling for the student, so that the student is engaged, the student is learning, and the student is making academic and social gains and present in the classroom and not sent out of the classroom. So let me see who is participating in this webinar session. I heard that there are a lot of people have registered. So I was eager to see, are they general education teachers, special education teachers, any administrators? I see a lot of speech pathologists and other support staff. And there's a parent as well. Looks like it's still coming in. Okay. The majority today seem to be other support staff, most possibly behavior support staff, and that's good, about 42%, and then a lot of speech pathologists. That's wonderful, and special education teachers. That's great. Okay. The data that's currently available on behavioral needs of students tell me, based on a report from the Journal of Pediatrics, that it was a survey that was done in 2016. And it was really a children's health data. But it involved a very large database, over 43,000 youths. What they found, the researchers found, that 7.4% of the children and teenagers in the U.S. had behavioral or conduct problems. And many similar number had anxiety, and a smaller number had depression. So how do these behavioral problems show themselves up in the classroom? How do the students exhibit these behaviors in the classroom? How does it impact us? The data also showed that 78.1% of those with depression received treatment, compared with the lesser number, 59.3% of those with anxiety and those with behavioral conduct problems did not receive treatment similar to those with depression. And the students with depression, actually the percentage, as you notice, was less. And the other important factor was among children living below the federal poverty level, more than 1 in 5, that is about 22% of children living in the kind of poverty zone had a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. This is based on information from the CDC. And a lot of factors, family, community, and healthcare factors, are related to children's mental health. And it's also important to address these behavioral needs very early on, from maybe beginning as early as pre-K and K. Because what they found, this was another study, they found that aggression, lack of friendliness, lack of attentiveness, the children exhibit in the kindergarten, and they studied them, and they found that it impacted and it was predictive of lower income at a later year. So in other words, it was predictive of earning potential as an adult if these children exhibited these kind of aggressive behaviors or lack of social skills, lack of friendliness in kindergarten. And they used federal income tax data to view that. So it becomes imperative that we begin as early as possible in approaching these behaviors in a more reflective, contemplative manner. And the other important information data is based on the use of restraint and seclusion. So instead of pursuing preventive approaches, we do pursue a punishment-based approach frequently. And there were 122,000 students. They were removed from the classroom instruction during the school year 2015-2016. So what happens is they don't benefit from instruction. They don't benefit, and they don't have the opportunity for social skills. They do not learn how to get along with peers, and they really do not know how to behave in the classroom finally, because they are moved out of the classroom. And there many of them were physically restrained, they were mechanically restrained or secluded, and this was 66% of those students were students with disabilities, identified disabilities. They came under one of the categories of disability. But in the total population, students with disability only constitute 13% of the enrollment. So that's a very high number. So we are not helping our students as much, those with special needs. And this was reported in February, as recent as February, at a congressional hearing. So we have to ask the question, how can the student needing the most intervention because of the behavior problem and the challenging behaviors that they exhibit, who has a disability as per the IDEA, how can that student learn appropriate behaviors, gain skills from instruction, and connect with the teachers and their peers if they are not in the classroom but they are removed from the classroom? This is something for every one of us to ponder over. So what we have to begin with thinking, what kind of preventive approaches can we put in place? How can we create that positive classroom and school environment for these kids who exhibit challenging behaviors? It is true that educators, again and again that I see, they are facing multiple demands, and many of them excellent teachers who tell me how much of their time is lost in paperwork. And often in their classroom, in order to avoid that kind of spectator drama when a student misbehaves, you are caught in the heat of the moment and you are confronting that challenging behavior, and educators tend to respond kind of reactively rather than reflectively, and they seem to use a punitive, get tough approach. But unfortunately, the negative consequences that you apply, or the average teacher is forced to apply sometimes, it actually ends up creating more work for the teacher without really solving the situation. And the behavior problems continue, and more of the students spend their time outside of the classroom. And it finally has a negative impact both on the student and on the educator. So we do need to find positive, evidence-based approaches and make the classroom a safe environment, respectful of the teacher and the student, and effective and relevant. So I have come up with an approach, a systematic approach that you can use. It is possible you can say that, I am familiar with all these things. It's not anything that is earth-shattering or new. But what I'm trying to do is, this webinar will show, and the next one, how you can integrate all of these essential features of this preventive strategies into a wholesome framework. So how do we try to use personalized solutions in addressing behavior issues? So there are these steps: reflecting, being proactive, enabling the student, verifying if the approaches are working, if the behavior strategies that you have employed. Are you engaging the student in instruction and in engaging with peers and engaging during the time that they are working as either as a part of a small group or independently? Are you making sure you are teaching not only the curriculum subjects, but also teaching for their emotional growth? Are you navigating this situation to make sure that success is what you meet at the end? What we will go through is we will go through some of these steps during this webinar, like some of the proactive steps, the reflection feature, the enabling feature, and the verify, and the following webinar, I will address the other features. How do we blend it all together in addressing the students' needs as a part of a wholesome framework? So first we have to understand why problem behaviors occur. We have to understand specific students' learning needs, what are their characteristics, what kind of disability issues and identified needs that the student has, what happens when we see that kind of inappropriate behaviors, why does it occur, when does it occur, what is the intent of the behavior? Is the student looking for attention? Is he or she trying to escape a non-preferred task? Or is the student seeking some kind of a tangible object? Or is this a sensory need and seeking sensory input? When you know the intent of that behavior, usually the educator is better prepared to plan and implement a student-specific and situation-specific intervention. It has to be student-specific, especially when we are dealing with some challenging behaviors. We have to tune in and be sensitive also to the student's cultural, ethnic, and home background. And at the end of this webinar, I will mention about children coming from traumatic backgrounds and how it impacts their behavior in the classroom. And it is important for us to be sensitive. And this reminds me, at the conference this past week, one of the teachers was almost in tears. It was a different topic that I was presenting. It was much more on the mindfulness and also about training paraeducators. And this particular educator, she shared with me, and she was almost breaking down at that time. She said, what could I do when my paraeducator talks in such a harsh manner? And what do I do? What do I do? How do I help make sure that the student does not completely break down even further? So it is also important at this point for us to remember that we have to be culturally sensitive. We cannot use ethnic discrimination in how we respond to problem behaviors. So that's also important. And it is also important that the people who are working as paraeducators, as teaching assistants, also are guided by the same principles. So in the proactive approach, all of you know about the ABC chain, I'm sure. How do we need to understand the behavior? We need to gather the data. And the first step, of course, is making sure we define that behavior clearly. Even though it is the number, it's not the A, it's the B, but that precise description of the behavior is extremely important and is almost the first step. Then we look at what is the situation. What is it that is triggering that particular behavior? What is the event that precedes that behavior? Is it transition? Is it something else? Is it a difficult task? So we have to look at that from that angle. Then we have to, when we are defining the behavior, it is not enough if we say the student is aggressive, the student is non-compliant. What is the student doing? Throwing the worksheet into the trash can? Or is throwing it at other students? Is he screaming? Is he getting angry and shouting at the teacher? What is the student exactly doing to show that he is non-compliant or disrespectful? And what is the consequence that follows? I'm sure you are all familiar with this one too. Is it something that happens routinely, that he is either in younger grades, they may be sent to timeout, or if they are older, they may be sent to the office, or they may be sent, if it is repeated behavior, they may even be sent to the isolation room, or if the student is engaged in very aggressive behaviors, it may be even they are subject to restraint or seclusion. So we do need to note that. So what are some behaviors? How do we make sure what are some triggers? Maybe the transition from the classroom to the cafeteria, transition from the classroom to an assembly, and when there is a big crowd in the assembly and the student has to go there, and if the child is a student with autism, then that can trigger severe meltdown. Or is it just absence of teacher? Is there a substitute teacher that day, and adjusting to a new person could cause problem? Or is the student seeking attention? Okay, and by the student teacher reprimanding or repeatedly telling him what he should be doing or what he should not be doing, we tend to focus much more on what he should not be doing rather than what he or she should be doing. Is the student getting actually attention? Or is the student escaping, trying to, if it's a difficult activity and the student does not want to do that math work or the writing work, is that a response to that? Or is it a sensory need? How does the behavior exhibit itself? Throwing the toys, throwing pencil, refusing to complete the work, fighting with another student, grabbing materials, running away from group, adults, or even classrooms. And what is the consequence? Is the student getting the attention? Is the student getting to not do the work but go into the office so he escapes? Or is the student getting positive reinforcement and praise for what he is doing? So let's look at some behaviors. Student arrives at the school and the paraeducator escorts him from the bus into the classroom, but the student on the way throws himself down on the sidewalk and he refuses to walk into the school or into the classroom. It might happen even in the hallway. What is the antecedent here? Naturally, it's the transition, and if it is a child with autism, that often the transitions are extremely difficult. And a simple visual would have helped, and preparing the student in advance for that transition would have helped prevent that. Student has difficulty sitting and attending to her work. She will often get out of the seat, and she's frequently told to return to her seat. So, is the problem behavior gets in trouble with teacher, or gets her out of her seat, or not liking school? Of course, it's getting out of her seat, which is an inappropriate behavior when the instruction is going on. So it is important to define that behavior precisely. And the student, within few minutes of the arrival of the substitute teacher, gets into an argument with her and is sent to timeout. Later, he has a mini meltdown on his way back from music, and the substitute teacher sends him to the office. And the student has successfully managed to get out of the classroom. That's also avoid that person. Both has happened. So it is important, again, to prepare the student in advance for an unexpected new person that is in the classroom instead of the teacher. So what are some other proactive steps? It's important to prevent problem behaviors before they occur. So it is critical to have close observation, supervision, and to clearly see if the student is beginning to exhibit any subtle signs of an approaching behavioral outburst. Watch out for these signs: swinging legs, clenching fists, fidgeting, making noises, and then intervene to prevent the meltdown. And it is also important to observe and see, is it something that happens regularly when the student is presented with math work and he sees this page with 30 problems and he immediately says, no, I don't want to do this kind of thing to himself, and then refuses to do and gets into an argument and all that. Is this something that's being repeated? So we have to kind of examine and make some adjustments and adaptations to prevent this from happening. So intervene quickly before the frustration sets in. Or is it writing activity that is causing it? Can we provide some supports for that student? The interesting thing is research evidence shows that close supervision and monitoring, watching out for that fidgety behaviors, any subtle signs that the student may be exhibiting, when watching out for that and taking preventive action results in decreases in disruptive behaviors during classroom instruction and also during transitions. So it is important to do that. For example, this student exhibits the following behaviors. He refuses to stay at his desk, throws objects, kicks, and sometimes hits adults, and occasionally tries to run out of the classroom. This is based on a situation that I observed. What are some preventive strategies that you can apply as a proactive step? Create a personal space for that student. You can teach him how to observe this personal space because you do not want him hitting others. So in other words, 2 feet in front of you. Bring your arms together and say, this is my space. Bring your arms together and clasp them. So it gives you about 2 feet space in front of you. And teach the student also how to maintain that 2 feet space in front of him. And practice this for several days so that, say, this is your space and this is my space. You can't come into my space without asking my permission. So you show that and you pair it with a visual if this is a student with autism so that the student sees that and remembers and holds his hand back before trying to hit someone else. And it's also important to prevent the student from running away, to post a stop sign at the door. And when he sees, and train the student to observe that stop sign and kind of tape a boundary around also the student's desk. So that is the student's space. When he is working, he is within that boundary. So a lot of these kind of visuals help. The other set of tools that you can use, what are called rule cue cards, or cue cards, and they are rules paired with pictures to remind the student about appropriate behaviors in different types of settings. A kind of a universal symbol for no, a stop symbol, and let's say he's in the cafeteria and the student is upset and wants to scream. You must have a picture as well as the word for keeping himself, his mouth quiet and no screaming. Occasionally you can use no, but at the same time it is important to, as much as possible, use positive signs and maintaining personal space. All of this you can create visuals and help the student. And also teach the student how to ask for a break, how to ask for assistance when feeling frustrated, upset, or if it is noisy, or if you find, especially with students with autism, they are putting their hands over their ears and they are trying to protect themselves from the sensory overload. Provide an encouraging comment when the student is actually following the direction. Instead of saying, good job, say exactly what, I like the way you're walking to the cafeteria. I like the way you're sitting down and listening. I like the way you're remembering about the personal space. You want that behavior to be repeated. Instead of being reflective, it's important for every one of us to practice being, instead of being reactive, it is important for us to be reflective in our approaches. We become very anxious and we want to stop the behavior immediately, so we try to sometimes be reactive. But this reactive response only ends up escalating the behavior. It is true that sometimes when you have not observed what the student is doing and the student is suddenly acting up, you may not have the time or the experience to use the right technique. But it is important to be constantly observant and at the same time take advantage of any paraprofessional, paraeducator that may be available in your classroom to watch out for these kind of behaviors and guide them to take a reflective action. And it is important not to be predisposed towards students in terms of their behavior. And he always does that. He always behaves badly. It's important that we view every day as a fresh day and approach the student in a positive manner. And I already mentioned about being sensitive to children from different ethnic, cultural backgrounds and how sometimes their home background or if they're child raised in poverty or if they have come from a traumatic background, that may impact them. Some of them may get very terrified, but some others may have learned how to ignore any yelling or scolding from an adult. So we do need to take these things into consideration. And most importantly is to encourage their friendship skills, the social skills. Provide activities where either they're working with one partner at least, or if they're in small group, and help them to connect with others so that they feel they belong in the classroom. And watching their peers also will create a greater willingness for them to change. Provide opportunities to make choices. Choice making is a very powerful tool, but we don't often use it. My usual example that I shared is if the student is finding the writing task to be extremely difficult. And we have observed that over a period of a few days at least. When he's given writing task, he immediately gets frustrated and almost beginning to act up, or he refuses to do, or he doesn't finish it at all. So what can we do to help the student? Can we give him a word bank? Can he work with a peer? Can he fill in sentences and just puts in one word from that word bank? So can we make accommodations like this that are adaptations that provide the student with additional tools to make the task easier and less frustrating? Respond to build positive relationship. Avoid as much as possible negative reaction. So as part of this reflect and respond, let's say the student is beginning to exhibit fidgety behaviors. Intervene to prevent the meltdown. Teach the student, especially when he is taking a break. That's a great opportunity when the student is calm, not when he is acting up. When the student is calm, teach the student coping skills, how to calm down, how to take deep breaths, how to count to 100, how to request a break so that he can go in there, count down to 10 or 100 or 50, depending on the developmental and the age level of the student and the skill level of the student, and get him to take deep breaths, maybe beginning with 5 deep breaths and then increasing it to 10. These kind of techniques taught when the student is calm, and remind him with a picture symbol when he is just beginning to show that fidgety behaviors will help. Give positive attention when the student is actually asking for help and is practicing counting. So behavior change takes a lot of effort and a lot of planning, and it requires consistent implementation, but we have to be patient and we have to be calm, because we don't gain anything through using a punishment reactive approach. And when the situation is very turbulent, and then at that time the teacher has to be calm, and that's not a time you can really argue or argue with the student. And it is important to be firm, but at the same time calm in responding to it. And you may have to have an action plan if the student frequently engages in very serious type of challenging behavior. You have to have an action plan, and you have to have a support team helping you. So I have some poll questions here. This is kind of an expanded version. Limit the amount of visuals and is your room free of clutter to enable students, especially those with ADHD and students with autism, to prevent sensory overload. Do you provide that? Is that one of the things that you do provide as a proactive strategy? Do you make encouraging comments when the appropriate behavior is observed, or you just stop with good job? Do you point out the specific behavior that the student is engaging in? Do you prepare the students in advance for upcoming changes in activities, in settings, in personnel? Do you plan ahead and provide that additional proactive support? Do you routinely use universal design for learning principle to remove barriers? Like I mentioned about that student experiencing difficulty with writing. So you provide kind of a word bank that helps the student. That's a mild, minor adaptation, but that makes that student succeed, and it facilitates the student's participation and response opportunities. Do you routinely and regularly use cue cards, gestures, and prompts, and proximity control, going near the student and reminding the student with a picture symbol when the student is beginning to exhibit fidgety behaviors or problem behaviors? Do you have a designated safe space in your classroom for students to go and take a break and calm down and then return back to the instruction? So you will see the poll questions that will have limited text. Oh, I don't know, I don't see that. I don't see the poll. I don't know what happened. Oh, yes, it's my fault. Okay. You will see limiting visual displays in room, making encouraging comments, advanced preparation for changes in routine, incorporating UDL to remove barriers to participation, remind the student about behavioral expectations through cue cards and gestures and proximity control, and you have a designated safe space. The results are still coming in. I see that encouraging comments, that's very good, positive approach, that's helpful, and being very specific about the behavior that you see. And the other one is advanced preparation. Yes, that will prevent a lot of meltdown, especially for students with autism. And using cue cards and all that, it looks like we can definitely do more on limiting the visual displays because that also adds to the sensory overload of the student. The other thing that will also help is using universal design for learning, so to facilitate more active participation. That way the student will feel positive, the student will feel included, and the student will not need to seek attention in negative ways. Thank you. Okay, it's wonderful that the three areas that are dominant are encouraging comments and advanced preparation. That's extremely critical for students with autism. And then reminding through cues and gestures and proximity control. So we are moving on. The third element, we looked at the proactive approaches. We looked at reflect and response. And now we are enabling the learner. This is as part of your holistic framework of addressing challenging behaviors. So what are some instructional supports you can provide? We just discussed adjusting the task demands. Everybody else is writing a whole paragraph or a whole page. The student who is experiencing difficulty with writing uses the word bank and may have to do just, or sometimes it may be that you give them the first sentence and the second sentence, and they just complete the third sentence, and that so reduced task demands. Instead of doing 30 math problems, they may do the first 7, the middle 7, and maybe the last 5. So these are adjustments that you can do in order to make it easier for the student to complete the task and to prevent challenging behaviors. And provide additional time. Provide motivation for the task. Use photos, drawings, and try to see if you can weave that into a kind of a game. Could they finish part of the task with a partner? Could they do it partly on a computer? And I already mentioned about precursor behaviors and watching out and helping the student to calm down. And also it's important that we teach the necessary social emotional skills. I have a few slides later on that will explain it further. And we need to build their social emotional maturity. Instead of punishing them for lack of it, we need to increase their social emotional growth. So we need to guide them to get in touch with their feelings and to be able to express them safely and appropriately. So include as part of your daily routine a few minutes at the beginning or a few minutes at the end of some kind of calming practice and calming strategies. And see if you can weave in some physical activities, because physical activities help them also to kind of de-stress, reduce the anxiety and the stress level. And also focus on how do you build that adult-child relationship, the teacher-student relationship. make sure you match those interventions to match the student's needs. You may have a higher functioning student who has emotional disturbance. His needs may be different from another student who has intellectual disabilities, and she may have more communication and difficulty with understanding the concept and comprehension issues. So it is important to look at their interests, look at their strengths, look at their weaknesses, look at their learning styles, and also to some extent their cultural and ethnic background. And it is important that we practice even when we feel inside of us agitated because of the way a student's behavior. It's important to use a very unemotional, calm tone of voice, and also to simplify the language. Sometimes we load on several words into a sentence, and the student has lost you after the first few words. So we have to kind of minimize the number of words as we are giving instruction. That will also help. So enabling through providing social emotional supports. How do you nurture social emotional development, social emotional growth? What are some activities that you can do? At a younger age, if they are in kindergarten, first grade, they can learn to label their emotions and identify it and matching it with pictures. And then maybe they can move on to matching a situation with a feeling. I felt sad when my friend didn't want to come and play with me. Maybe kind of like a situation like that. Or when something broke, or I'm feeling sad. Or the teacher may say, when my phone broke, I felt sad. Or things of that nature, so that they match the situation with that particular feeling. And then you also provide a variety of activities where they're working with a pair, working with other students, working in a small group situation where they are taking turns and they are sharing the materials. And this helps with friendship and socialization, and also to give and take. I give you, you take from me, and tolerance for others. And play group games. In the younger grades, you can certainly play, simple games like even musical chairs. But with the older ones, you can even take a subject like astronomy or space exploration, as we are celebrating the 50th year. Using that as a theme, and maybe a 20 questions game or a charades game you can play, but they can practice their vocabulary. They can learn to take turns. They can learn to tolerate each other. And you can also use the same type of game, charades, to role play different types of emotions, and then match it with kind of a situation that's a classroom situation. For the younger kids, there is a technique called the turtle technique, and those of you who are behavior therapists, or even several of you who are educators, would know about the turtle technique. It is to use a problem-solving situation, how the turtle pulls his head in, calms down, counts to 10. Okay, I have come up with a solution when the turtle is upset, and then comes out and pulls his head up. So that's kind of the turtle technique. If you put it on the Google, I'm sure you will find. And then let the student practice calming techniques, breathing techniques to calm down, counting to calm down. And then use role play and drama, use music and movement. All of these things help with the growth of the social emotional as well as friendship skills, and generally to reduce anxiety and stress, which causes some of the behavior problems in our classrooms. Continuing with the enable, building emotional vocabulary, develop the students' competence in how they manage their emotions. And I have a suggestion here for a few books. And you can use the books for role play. You can use that book for your writing activity. You can use the book for discussing different feelings. Depending on your grade level, you can adapt it to that situation. Another one is, how do you use conflict resolution? You have a problem, how do you solve it? It's kind of a group meeting. And take up real-world classroom situations that are happening and teach positive ways to resolve those conflicts. One of the books that I came across for somewhat older children, maybe 9, 10, and this is a book called Joey Pigza Swallowed the Key. And this is showing a young child, or not a very young child, a boy who has some turbulent background. His grandmother is kind of tough with him, and his father disappears. But through the help that his teacher provides and his mother provides, he's able to make better choices. Initially, he was making poor choices, and he was getting into a lot of trouble, and that transformation that happens as a result of this teacher's action and the boy, Joey, himself making better choices helps him to overcome that difficult situation. Another book that's great with younger children is On Monday When It Rained. If you're teaching about feelings and associated situations with younger kids, it's a great book. Another one that's a fantastic book, I feel, because it has beautiful, phenomenal pictures. It's called When Sophie Gets Angry, Really, Really Angry by Molly Bang. And that shows how this girl goes through this anger phase when her mother insists on her sharing the toys with her sister and says, your turn is over, now it's your sister's turn. And she goes for a walk and how she learns to calm down. So these are all things that we can use as part of our teaching, part of our kind of engaging our students to develop calming skills. And at no time in the history is it more relevant than now. So you have all used all of these things. You have used some proactive techniques. You have used reflective responses in addressing problem behaviors. You have provided enabling things through your environment, through your instructional supports, through providing social emotional competence training. Then you want to verify how these actions that you have taken or these proactive steps that you have taken is helping, is it working? So you want to verify that. And of course, all of us are familiar with setting up a data collection system. It is important to work as a team. You know, if the general education teacher and the special education teacher and the paraeducator who may be going into an inclusive setting, or the paraeducator who may be working in the special education setting, and maybe the school counselor, or maybe the behavior therapist, the psychologist, the speech therapist, all of you work together as a team to gather the data on the problem behavior occurrence. How long is it taking? How long does it last? The duration. When does it occur? What are those situations that trigger that behavior? What is the intensity? Any of the new steps that you have taken, is it helping to bring that challenging behavior to somewhat of a controlled situation? Is it bringing it down? So measure the outcomes of the intervention. And are there any implementation gaps? Are there still continuing challenges that need to be addressed? It is important that the team meet regularly to assess if the intervention is working, if there need to be any changes. Is it being followed consistently in all settings? In the setting where it is being followed consistently, is it yielding any positive results? Have the frequency of the problem behavior decreased? Are there fewer outbursts? Has the recovery time improved? Are just the adaptations and supports? by adjusting it, is that helping the student to be more functional and more productive? Is this data showing an improvement? Monitor if the student is also using self-monitoring tool. And you can also take some anecdotal data. Let's say you are outside, if you're in the cafeteria, you can use Post-it notes to note down some of the behaviors. And then you may want to, in addition, as part of this verify feature, you can also provide the student with a self-monitoring checklist. This may vary depending on your situation and depending on the student's specific behaviors that the student is exhibiting. But you can help the student to go down. I am feeling crabby is what I use instead of saying angry, and then moved on, becoming cautious to calm down. And I'm working quietly. I am using a quiet voice when I'm working or when I'm asking a question. I am raising my hand to help. Some of these things, and I finish this first, and then I get to do whatever the preferred activity may be for a few minutes, or I take a break, or I go and work on the computer. Some of these things for the student to monitor himself, because ultimately we are not going to be there. We want self-management as the ultimate goal for every student. So let's look at this case scenario. This is a student. I have taken a pretty extreme case. He gets easily angry and gets upset when anyone disputes whatever he is saying or when he feels that he is being mistreated. Sometimes, or quite frequently, his anger escalates to the point that he jumps out of his seat. This is a student. Let's assume that he has maybe emotional disturbance. And he leaves the classroom sometimes and then comes back in himself. He jumps out of his seat and all these, and then he may even. On this particular day, another student annoys him by making some kind of a maybe not so pleasant comment about his shirt. So the student C, responds screaming, saying, "Shut your mouth," and several other students start laughing, and he gets even more upset, and he turns over his desk, and he heads up the door. This is an extreme situation. You may not come across this situation that frequently, but it occasionally does happen. So the natural reaction from the teacher in the classroom may be the teacher may be provoked to yell at him or to stop that or to remove him immediately from the classroom and take him to the office. All these intense reactions may even further escalate the outburst. And also, if this is something that happens more than what we would like kind of frequently, if it happens, then sending him to the office, he is not really learning what is appropriate behavior in the classroom, and he is also missing out on instruction. And also all those peers, the peer who started this off by making that nasty comment, and all of the others who were laughing, they are also not learning anything about how to have appropriate peer interactions with somebody who is not feeling good. So a long-term solution is what we need to seek, and that will help the student develop self-control, cultivate positive relationship with his peers, and also make appropriate academic gains. So what are some personalized contemplative discipline steps that we need to use? We certainly want to use proactive step. We want to prevent behavior escalation. So if this is a behavior that you have seen before, then you need to get together as a team and see how can you help the student to remain calm and to be in the classroom. Can you use cue cards when he's beginning to show this kind of anger or this kind of upset expression on his face? Are there signals you can use, gestures you can use? Can we teach the student to be more reflective? Then as the reflective response from the teacher is how do we teach the student to go to the calm down area? How do we teach the student to use self-regulation? Is the student offered a choice to, if the student is finding the task to be difficult, can he do the work at his desk? So these are all some of the things. Can he go when he is upset? Can he go to the back of the room and work instead of walking out of the classroom when he is upset? He can calm down in that corner and at the same time do the same work that the other people are doing. Or can he just take a break for 3 minutes, calm down, and come back and join the group? And then there is this practice, and this restorative practices is coming in vogue greatly, and there were several sessions focused on that at the recent conference that I went to. It focuses on building positive relationship between peers, between each other among the students, as well as between the teacher and the student and the entire school team. And it offers kind of an alternative, a positive approach, and we use this technique to assist the student in teaching them how to build a positive relationship with his peers. And one of the techniques as part of this restorative practices is to have classroom circles. So maybe the teacher can have a kind of a classroom meeting, classroom circle, where they discuss these kind of behaviors. Not only the behavior of student C, but also the behavior of student, or create a situation and they try to solve that problem as presented to all of the students. They are presented with a situation, and together they brainstorm and address the problem and say, what are some problem-solving strategies can we use in order to be a friendly, happy, positive classroom where each student is appreciative of the others and we get along with each other. And enable and empower the student C to seek help from his peers, to get along with his peers, to reduce his frustration, to assist his peers to develop greater understanding of his feelings, how he is feeling from the student C's perspective. And of course, group games, role play, problem-solving situations, all of those will help. And then, of course, you have to verify to make sure if the intervention strategies are working. In our next webinar, we will be focusing on engaging the students with challenging behaviors during instruction and recruit their help in solving their own behavior issues, navigating this situation effectively with collaborative solutions, and I will go much more into these restorative practices, and also to teach new skills that will replace the challenging behaviors. I have a variety of references and resources included, and the one that I mentioned about the restorative practices, it's by Armour, and it's a long article that you can maybe access by copying that information, posting it on Google Scholar. And the IRIS Center also offers a variety of incredible amount of resource, training resource on behavior in classroom management. And as I said, my own behavior guide goes much more into detail, and it is available from Education 311. The book Restorative Discipline Practices is also a great book, and that's also listed among the references. And there are many others that are included here. And thank you, everyone. We are just on the dot at 12. It is 12. And if you have any questions, do put them in the chat box, and I will certainly answer them to my best. And thank you very much to AbleNet University for hosting this webinar. The next webinar, the second section of this contemplative discipline steps, would be on August 20th at the same time, and it will be the second webinar of this two-part series. Again, thank you everyone for attending, and now I will address any questions that you may have. So there are a lot of questions here. Let me see. I have refreshed twice and still no sound. Okay, this is a sound question. Make encouraging statement, that's great. Limit the visual display, that's absolutely important too. We'll try to create. I see you have your hand raised. Okay, it makes them more focused towards the teacher than the para. I'm not quite sure. Maybe this is in response to the limited visual display. Make encouraging statement. You know, in terms of the para, if the para is sitting within 3 feet of the student, it is possible that the student is much more focused on the para. It is important that the para circulates or is away from that student exhibiting the problem behavior or the student needing support. So it is important that the para-educator is not within close proximity, but close proximity for a few seconds, then moves around, supporting other students or away or doing something for the teacher. So I'm answering to the best of my ability because I'm not quite sure if there is a question.
Padmaja, those weren't questions. Those were just comments being made by an attendee while you were speaking.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. You know, there are several comments here that talk about how they will create a better space. They will limit the visuals in the classroom. This is awesome. I think we are truly going to succeed in reducing those problem behaviors, and that data will show much less. And yes, it is very, very important to provide motivation, and I see that as a comment. It makes them more confident and comfortable with the para or friends in class. That is true when they are motivated for the task. Confidence does lead to progress because confidence reduces your stress and anxiety level. There are a lot of comments.
We did have one question just come in. Suzanne says that the student is nonverbal, 8 with intellectual delay, and they need more help with keeping her engaged, therefore reduced behavior.
Okay. I'm still reading that question because there are so many comments. How can I help my para staff become more objective with examining behaviors? That's an excellent question because the same question came up last week during the Behavior Institute, and there was a para session. First of all, for students with complex communication needs, it's important to use assistive technology to aid, and of course, we don't need to go any further. AbleNet is your best resource and best source for that. And it is important to limit the number of icons that you use when you're beginning to shape that student's communication abilities. It's extremely important that the student understands and comprehends those limited icons that you have used before you make progress. So that thing. And in terms of examining the behaviors and writing down the behaviors, maybe you can create a form where you have observed some of the behaviors and you have noted those behaviors down, and instead of saying the student was very aggressive, the student was non-compliant, what did the student do? Did the student throw the paper away? Did the student push away the object? Did the student cry? Did the student scream? Write those behaviors down and train your para-educator, at least point out those behaviors. What did the student exactly do when the student exhibited these disruptive behaviors? So have that person put just a check mark for the behaviors you have identified in the student already. So if you have a list of behaviors and then you have when the behavior occurred. Did it occur in that special education classroom? Did it occur in the cafeteria? Did it occur in the playground? Where? The location. And then how many times did the student scream? Maybe a number of times. Each time the person can put a little check mark in that area. And so that is one way you can become more objective in noting down and guide your paraeducator that just saying the student is aggressive or the student is non-compliant is not enough. They have to clearly mark that place where that particular behavior was observed, when it was observed, and what happened. It's also important to note down is it a difficult task, or is it transition, or when is that behavior occurring, or is there some change in the situation? So it is all important, and maybe in one of the future webinars, I may even address some of these things in terms of training the paraeducator. And the next one, of course, we will focus on the second part of this webinar. Thank you. Thank you very much. And there are a lot of comments. There is one other question that I noticed. That's the one that Deb was mentioning. The student is nonverbal with intellectual delay. I need more help with keeping her engaged, therefore reduced behavior. There are a variety of things that you can do with a student who is nonverbal. And, one of the things that will engage the student is, let's say you have some pictures and you have the vocabulary words associated with that picture. Let's even go back to this emotions and feelings. And the student is involved in matching the picture with the word. That's building vocabulary. I am not sure what most probably the student is in first grade, second grade level. Maybe the student is functioning much more at a much younger age. So it's important. It is difficult for me to answer that question because it's a very big question. So it's almost the subject of a whole webinar. There are a variety of things that you can do, but you can use Velcro and teach vocabulary. You can use objects to count, and then the student drops the objects into 3 different containers. And you can paste the number, Velcro the number on a foam sheet or on a felt sheet, and the student matches the numeral with the appropriate objects that are also Velcroed. These are all some things. When the student is motivated and engaged, your problem behaviors are likely to decrease. And if the student just pushes away the object from his desk or something, maybe you can provide a tray, or you can even use the top of a Xerox box and attach it to the desk, and then provide objects within that framework so that the student is playing with that object or counting the object or matching that object with the word. These are all things that they can do. It will reduce problem behaviors and build more attention and focus. It is not something that will happen within a few hours or a few days. It will take months, maybe years, but you can begin that training. Thank you very much, and I'm going to say goodbye. And again, thank you to AbleNet.